All right, well, let's get started today. So today's event is brought to you by Bucketlist Rewards, the ‑1 employee recognition and reward platform. Super exciting. And of course, we are in partnership with Servant-Minded Leadership Consultive, and they're focused on empowering forgotten leaders. We also have VeeMind here, a platform focused on leadership quality measured like data. So they're the perfect partners for this topic. I'm really excited to hear from both of our panelists today. Now, before we do jump into that, we do have a couple housekeeping items that we like to go over first so that you get the best experience out of our webinar. So we do have our lovely chat box, which some of you have already discovered, which is awesome. We do want to make one note here when you're using the chat box. If you want to just check that it is being sent to everyone, there is another option that sends it to just an individual person. But if you do want your message to go out to everyone, just make sure when you're looking at your chat box, it says everyone. Otherwise, you can hit the 3 little dots when you're in the chat box to change it so that your message goes out. Q&A, we do have a Q&A box as well. So if you have questions in particular, please throw them in that Q&A box and we'll see what we can get answered today. Thirdly, we have polls. We will run a couple of polls throughout today's webinar. They are all anonymous. We would love to hear what you have to think. And just as a general note, we do love interaction. So feel free to utilize that chat box and those Q&A and interact with us throughout today's webinar. Professional development credits. So for those of you who do need your professional development credits, we will go over them at the end of the session, and we will also send them as well as the session recording out via email. So lots of good stuff for everyone today. Now to kick us off, our panel for today. Myself, Jessica, I am part of the Bucketlist Rewards team here. I'm a customer onboarding manager who really loves recognition and rewards. Super excited to talk about this topic today. We also have John and Felix here. And John, I'm going to pass it to you first to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Jessica. My name is John Antonucci. I'm the founder at SML Consultive. You mentioned earlier our passion is empowering forgotten leaders, and those are primarily the frontline and middle management leaders that often are placed in positions without any opportunity to really know what they're doing. So we love trying to come alongside them and provide resources. And that's why we love this opportunity to talk about feedback, because without that feedback, they don't have an opportunity to grow. And so we're excited to be here today and looking forward to a great time together.
Awesome. Thank you, John, for joining us. And Felix, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Super thankful for being here. My name is Felix. I'm the co-founder and CMO of VeeMind, a leadership development software in which we use feedback via surveys to gather the data that we need and that we look at. I spent the last 10 years in digital marketing and innovation startups and crypto. And just to give you a little background on how I got to building a software for leadership is that the most prominent examples, I guess, with FTX and Binance, you've all seen that. And I've witnessed so many more projects who had billions, or not billions, sorry, millions of funding, but still managed to not succeed. And in my opinion, in the end, in hindsight, it was almost always a leadership problem and rooted in a lack of feedback culture. So this is what brought me to doing this 1 year ago with my co-founder, Anthony. He's also from Poland. So a little bit more of a cultural mix-up here. And we've been doing this together with a consultancy from Hamburg called Company Companions, to give a little shout out.
Amazing. Amazing. We've got 2 great speakers today. So I'm really excited to hear all of the wonderful nuggets that you're going to be sharing with us. So icebreaker question. So I'm going to put a poll up here on the screen that is just asking you about the themes that you're most interested in today. So if you give me one quick second here to get my poll out. So everyone should see a little box that has popped up on your screen here with a poll. Would love it if you would select the theme, or if you have multiple themes that you might be interested in learning more about today. It's really awesome. It just helps us see where we can focus as we're going throughout our webinar. So give it a couple of seconds. Now, while we're letting everyone come into the poll and put their answers in, Felix and John, what do you think about these topics? You think these are some things that we can address today?
It's It's exactly what we're here to do. I think it's going to be really exciting. I think that regardless of which one we want to focus on based on the feedback of the audience, between Felix and myself, we're going to be able to hopefully add some dynamic value and give some tools and thoughts that will help make this a more effective strategy.
For sure. Only interesting topics, and all greatly aligned with what I and John talk about all the time. So
yeah,
happy to talk about it. Yes.
Awesome. Just going to share those results for a second so we can see where everyone is, what everyone is choosing here. Looks like there's a big interest in building psychological safety, which is awesome, as well as coaching strategies for giving and receiving feedback. But it looks like as a general, everyone is interested in all of the topics, which is really awesome.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you everyone for your input there. I'm just going to end our poll, and I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen for a little bit. So we're going to move on over to our fireside chat. So it's a little bit more of, conversation style, where we're going to go through some questions and discuss the topics that you were just saw on your screen. So instead of looking at the presentation the whole time, you get to look at our lovely faces instead, which is, in my opinion, is a nice thing, but, you might feel differently. But to kick us off here, question number 1. Oh, Jennifer, yes, I'm so glad to see you on here. Oh my goodness. I just have to give a quick shout out to Jennifer. Jennifer is one of the most lovely people I've ever met in my life. She is amazing. She is one of our lovely accounts here at Bucketlist, and just an overall really amazing person. So really happy to see you on here, Jennifer. Now, first question here, we got for Felix, or starting off with Felix here. What's the best way to ask for feedback in an organization? And what are some tips to building good feedback loops? And Felix, pass it to you first.
Yes, thanks. Great question. I would always start with, it helps to start with yourself, so with self-reflection. So when you want to ask for feedback, it's always good to reflect on your performance first and then ask for it. And I would do it the same way if you're want to motivate your employees, for example, to provide feedback to you, ask them to reflect on themselves first. So this as a start maybe. And then, of course, a safe environment is super important, which is what we at VeeMind are all about. So it cannot be about blaming one another. It has to be about support. There has to be an understanding about this feedback culture and the benefits for everyone. And then, of course, it has to be trustworthy. So it has to be anonymous and confidential, which is what we're trying to solve with our software, of course. And then there has to be no repercussions for negative feedback. So I never tie a bonus check to bad feedback or anything like that. The reason should be very clear. So there should be a clear objective, I would say. Be very specific in the questions that you ask. Don't ask general questions, so you know what you're looking for. Yes, and make it transparent, also super important, so that the results are accessible and that it's a two-way street. So the ones that are giving feedback are also the ones who are seeing the improvements or the actions being taken, which brings me to actionable feedback. So very important to make your feedback actionable. I'm sure there are more points, but I might give it over to John at this point. I think I have some more to add later.
Yeah, I think that Felix has done a great job of just kind of laying that foundation of what you're looking to do, and I think that starts with actually figuring out, what am I trying to do? There's a lot of organizations that have some form of feedback loop, but no actual means end idea. It's just something we do every year, and it ends up in a file cabinet or every semi-annually, whatever it is. But there's no real objective in place. So define, what is it that we're trying to accomplish through this feedback, because that will facilitate a greater buy-in. When people think it's just something we do every year, they're not going to provide real feedback. They're not motivated to. There's no reason to, because they know that they provided feedback last year and the year before that and the year before that, and they were not able to see any results. So I think first define what you're trying to accomplish, and then follow through, like feedback, or like Felix ended his statement with, is it's got to be actionable. So one of the things that I've done many times when soliciting feedback is telling the teams, I can't guarantee you that I'm going to do everything you ask. right? That's not reasonable for our people to expect that any suggestion, the suggestion might be get rid of desks and replace them with ping pong tables. There's only so much that one can do, right? But I can guarantee that every suggestion is going to be taken seriously and that we're going to take action where we can. And so when they see, hey, yeah, the ping pong table didn't happen, but it did get acknowledged. It was mentioned, hey guys, we noticed you wanted a ping pong table. Probably not going to be able to do that, but we also noticed that you asked for some lunchroom accommodations that are very reasonable for the culture of this company. And that's something that we can easily do to help you be more comfortable during that hour that you're not at your desk and you're trying to have some alone time and recharge. And we'd like to take action on that. And so just having a plan, what are we trying to accomplish, followed by actually accomplishing something, I feel like is really, really instrumental when you're saying, how do you ask? The question is important, but why are we asking and what are we going to do with asking is probably more important. And then, we can get into the nitty gritty as we kind of continue with this conversation about, okay, what questions do you ask and things like that. But if it's not framed well, I believe that in communication, framing is important. So what happens before and what happens after is often going to have a huge impact on what actually happens.
Right. I just want to stress this one point more. The consistency is so important, that it's not something that you're doing just once and then it's gone, but also going back to the person who provided feedback to you, you took action, and then ask again for feedback. Did I do well? Did I improve? How did you like my improvement, etc.? So, and ideally that's real time at the end. So this is what we want. We're starting maybe with a process where it's a quarterly thing, but then at the end we want a process where it's giving all the time in all directions, so that feedback just becomes a natural part of thinking in an organization. Yeah.
And recognizing that if you have either had a non-effective form of feedback loop in the past or no feedback loop in the past, that it's going to take time. So what Felix just mentioned about consistency, there has to be that coming back. Hey, how did we do? But also, I tend to believe that if you're either starting from scratch or even worse, starting from a place of ineffectiveness, it's going to be probably 3 feedback rounds of consistency and good framing and action and all of that before you're really going to get authentic feedback. Because going back to something Felix said, he talked about anonymity. That's super important to protect people to provide real feedback. I don't know of a single feedback time that happened the first time that people believed it was anonymous. Sure,
Right.
it's anonymous. Yeah. That's what they all say. Let's see who gets fired after this.
Right.
And then we'll decide who is, if it was really anonymous and who was telling who what. So I think that there has to be that pattern of consistency and trustworthiness built over a period of time. And if you're doing this, say semi-annually, or even worse, annually, I mean, it could be 3 years before you really see viable improvement, because the first year, you're not going to get real participation. The second year, people might start testing the waters. The third year, that's when you might actually get real feedback, because now there's a conversation that's happened. No, guys, they take this seriously. Take
Right.
30 minutes, fill this out, really give them feedback, because the last couple of years, we've seen cool things happen. And that's when you start to get real authentic feedback that is super actionable.
Which brings me to another point is you always have to have management on board, of course. It's so important to have role models acting on the feedback and asking for feedback, so that it's not just something that it's being done on the lower parts, but it has to be lived throughout the organization. And we always like to say, when leadership is not a beauty contest, and I think this speaks to what John just said. It's the negative feedback. People are so afraid of negative feedback, and if this is the mindset, then you will only get bad data too. So yeah.
I'm wondering, I have a few thoughts that popped into my mind here. The first one I'm thinking about, John, you just said if you've been inconsistent or you're not doing it properly, now you've lost the trust of the organization. So in those first couple rounds where you're trying to fix it, how do you assess that data then, knowing that it's likely not accurate because people are just giving you whatever answer because they don't really care?
Yeah. Very carefully is really the answer. Very carefully, because You have to take it seriously or else you continue to erode trust. But at the same time, you have to take it with a grain of salt because trust hasn't been built. And so you may have that one person, Felix and I were talking in a previous conversation, and we were talking about how you may have that individual that is just, they're angry. They're an angry person. And so you get real feedback. Like they just no holds barred. It's just they give it to you. And you have a choice, right? Do you believe that that person is representative of the overall culture of the organization and they were the only one with the courage to actually share real thoughts? Or do you say, chances are this individual is probably just upset, and you go in and maybe you look and you realize they've been reprimanded by their leader in the last week and they got a demotion 6 months ago, whatever, right? And so they're just angry. But how do you deal with that in a way that makes it to where people don't point to that and say either, oh, well, when you get angry, that's when you get what you want, because that's not a healthy culture, or they don't care. I told them exactly how it was and they just ignored the whole thing. So that's the problem that you face. And I think the way to handle that is to do everything in your power to address the things that are the most reasonable. You may not be able to address everything, right? This individual might have just said that this leader is terrible, and unless they get fired, I'm quitting. And they're just, I mean, they're really trying to put you up against the ropes. And you're as an HR leader and you're saying, okay, wait a minute, can I really just take this one person's advice? No, but what you can do is you can show you're taking action. Hey, we received complaints about some of our leadership, and we believe that investing in leadership so that you guys can count on having good leaders is important. And so what we are going to be doing is in the course of the next 12 months, you're going to notice that some of your leaders are asked to attend various leadership seminars and participate in various resources, because we believe that if we don't empower the leaders, they can't empower you. And do you fire the leader because one person submitted a scathing review? No. But you do show that a scathing review is not going to be taken lightly by saying, hey, let's invest in those leaders, or let's look at this situation. Maybe the same person is angry not at a leader, but at, I'll go back to my lunchroom example because it's just silly enough to be a real thing. For those of you that are HR, you know that half of your complaints are exactly as important as I hate the lunchroom. And so in that event, right, does that mean you go as a company spend $2 million to renovate and turn your lunchroom into a Google lunchroom? No, probably not. But what you can do is you can say, hey, it seems like maybe the lunchroom isn't as comfortable as we'd like it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to just try to make some small changes. And you notice how I'm framing this, right? It's not just an espresso machine shows up with no communication. There's communication that ties that small change of an espresso machine to the results that we just got in feedback. And something I was going to mention later, because I think there's another question coming, but celebrate whatever feedback you do get. Even if it seems like it's illegitimate, even if it seems like it's innocuous or not really that helpful, celebrate it so that people know that we're actually valuing it. I used to, when I was a training manager, I was working with some remote personnel. And one of the countries that I worked in most often was Honduras. And in Honduras, the culture of Honduras, you do not question leadership. That's just part of their culture. It's very a yes ma'am, yes sir kind of a culture. And so I'm, the American guy on the screen training them. And I'm saying, hey guys, if you have any questions, just let me know. And they're like, right. And they're just going to listen. They're not going to say a thing. And so I would constantly, first of all, reaffirm that I want questions. And if something isn't clear, I want them to tell me and all that. And inevitably, it almost always took about a day and a half. That's just the culture. It always took about a day and a half for the first person to finally very timidly say something like, John, your video cut out there for a second. I don't think we quite got that. I'm sorry, sir. And when that would happen, I would, thank you. Oh, thank you. Hey, I really appreciate you letting me know that, because if you guys can't hear me, this is no good. So really, please, thank you so much, so-and-so. I want to thank you for letting me know. I need you all to do that. That is so helpful to me. I promise you, I want you to do that. And I made it such a big deal, simple thing. Maybe you and I would think, whatever. But for them, it was a hurdle. And so celebrating that gave them the freedom. And almost always, by the time that I was ready to release them to their operational side of training a couple of weeks later, there was no problem. They would be, hey, wait, what about this? I don't understand. Can you explain that better? This doesn't make sense. And we would be having dialogue, which is what real feedback is all about, as Felix said earlier.
And I also want to add to that, I mean, this is why I love working or partnering with SML, is because when you have someone who is giving a introduction into, feedback and how should this work? How should you give feedback? How should you receive it? How should you worship it, and be grateful for it? Then you will get to good data much quicker. But still, I would like to add to that we like to look at data in two ways. So feedback can be qualitative and quantitative. And in the beginning, the qualitative feedback is much harder to get in a good quality because it's so much harder to give, and you have to get the right framing, etc. So when we get negative qualitative feedback, we also like to look at the quantitative a lot and compare both sides. So they are both of the same coin, more or less, I would say. It's very, very important to compare these two. And in the beginning, I always say that the quantitative will give you a little bit more of truth because it's so much easier to get. It's when I was saying before that you should ask for specific questions. Don't ask like how social is your boss or how great are the social skills of your leader, but ask how often do you see him enjoy engaging with other people. So things that can be observable, things that can be answered easy within 1 to 6 or yes or no, whatever. And then later on, once you have a great training manager like John, for example, or someone else who is just holding you by the hand while you're walking along the feedback line, then the qualitative feedback will be much more important and so much richer in data and things that you can get out of it that are tangible. Yes.
And I'll just support Felix. He was talking about the way questions are asked. He mentioned loving working with SML. We love working with VeeMind because that is how they're asking questions, right? I love the fact that they're not saying on a scale of 1 to 5, how social is your leader? Which unfortunately is the way that most of us have been taught to gain quantitative feedback. Is, hey, on a scale of 1 to 5. The problem with that is very clear, and that is we live in a culture, you guys have probably heard this at fast food restaurants or maybe even hotels or things like that, where you'll hear people say something like, hey, we're looking for ratings, anything less than a 5 is a 0. If you've ever experienced that, you know that we live in a culture that's kind of the idea. So if I'm angry with you, I'm going to give you 1 star or 2 stars. And if it was at least reasonable, I'm going to give you 5 stars, because if I give you 3 stars, now I've got to explain myself. And I know you're probably going to get reprimanded. And it's this whole thing that's kind of changed in the service industry, right? So if I get away from the give me a rating, and he used the term how often. Now it's not about a rating; it's about a quantity of time, or I'm losing my word, but the ability to do it most often. So how often do you see your leader engaging with other people in a friendly way? Well, now it's not how friendly is your boss, or on a scale from 1 to 5, do you think your boss is friendly? Well, how often? Do you see him once a day, twice a day? Is it often? Is it sometimes? What does that look like? And it changes the conversation drastically when we're asked to really assess, wait a minute, what has my experience been? And then you're able to track that. And he mentioned how you get more from that initially because you can't get around that. You can't skirt those questions, and you can track that data. But then that will lead into qualitative data, where you're actually soliciting more authentic responses. And we had a case study that was kind of interesting, Felix and I, where we had somebody give qualitative data that told one story and quantitative data that told a completely different story. And it was a huge red flag, because we thought to ourselves, okay, how is it that on the how often questions, this individual looks mediocre at best? They did not score particularly well. And yet, when it came time to give qualitative data, all of a sudden they're perfect. No recommendations for improvement. Well, we then learned that particular leader was in some way manipulating their team, and that the team was able to more effectively and honestly provide feedback on the how often questions. But when it came time to answer questions like, I would like this leader to improve in the following areas, they weren't about to put any actual suggestions, because again, they weren't yet trusting that it was anonymous and they didn't know what would happen. And so that was a red flag, and that actually made some changes happen in that organization. But they're two sides of a coin, but that trust has to build for them to work in seamlessly. So one is really good for tracking in the meantime, and the other one you'll build throughout time as trust develops.
Exactly. And the patterns that you just mentioned are so interesting in the beginning, because people are not so aware of how they are actually giving feedback. And in the end, what you would want is that the qualitative feedback, like John just said, like, how can I improve my leader? How can I help him? How can I make him better? And what would I like him to improve on? And so on and so on. These are the questions that you want in a one-on-one later on, that you want after every meeting, after every session, after every presentation, that people feel comfortable enough to tell you exactly these things to your face, ideally. And if don't, you still have a software or like a process or something, a platform that gives you the opportunity to provide that feedback without being, blamed, or without having fear of repercussions in any sorts.
To the idea of kind of the progression of this, right? I know that many people that are probably attending this are in the HR space, and so you're more facilitating this. But in a perfect world, if the leaders are doing this effectively, they don't have to wait for official feedback mechanisms to create an effective feedback culture. So it may not be a celebrate somebody because they actually gave you real feedback on the on the quiz or the feedback form. It might be something as simple as you just had someone that came to you and told you about a problem with a software that you're using, or a some sort of I don't know, maybe Zoom's giving us issues. Hey, listen, we've had 3 meetings, and all 3 meetings Zoom is messed up. And if you celebrate that type of feedback, that actually starts to lay a foundation that my leader cares what I think, and my opinion is valued. And so it's not just hey, how can I improve feedback? If we're talking a culture of feedback, the culture of feedback, you're gonna appreciate that at all different levels. And so if it's, hey, Zoom is not doing as well for us as we like, and you say something like, oh, well, there's nothing we can do about that, let's just keep going to work. Well, what we've done is, without maybe realizing it, we have diminished the dignity of that individual, and we have said your opinion doesn't matter. And then we're shocked when 2 months later we give them this feedback form and we tell them, listen, we really care and we want to know what you're thinking. And they're like, maybe it's conscious. Probably it's not. Probably it's a subconscious thing that says, they don't care. They never have cared. I've brought them so many problems, so many opportunities for improvement over the year. They never take my suggestions. They're always arguing with me. They're always taking the side of the vendor or the client or the whatever over my opinion. Why would I believe that this one time a year is miraculously going to be different? And that, I think, is probably the biggest hurdle that HR faces, because HR probably wants unadulterated feedback. But to Felix's previous point about needing leader buy-in, if the everyday culture of the organization does not support a feedback culture, the once a year opportunity is not going to magically fix all of those problems.
Yeah,
These are
exactly.
all, yeah, no, that certainly some really good nuggets here that you have both shared. I have like 15,000 follow-up questions, but I don't think we're gonna have time for all of them. I think the biggest one though that I keep thinking about, because this is something that we and at Bucketlist have to deal with as well, is the manager buy-in aspect. So like when we're bringing in, or when companies are bringing in their recognition and reward program, one of the biggest hurdles is really getting managers and leadership to buy into this idea of recognizing in the organization. And it's pretty much tied to the success, really. Like it's if the leaders are not involved and they're not really bought in, the program's likely going to fail. And now we've just created more issues internally with the feedback loops and whatnot. So I'm curious, from your standpoint, what do you find helps with getting those leaders to say, yes, I want to be involved, I want to give feedback, I want to receive feedback, and really get them to be bought into this?
Go ahead, Felix.
Yeah, I think you have a lot to say as well. But for me, basically, if you have a way of building trust with them in before the whole thing starts, then this is the greatest thing that you can do. Of course, it starts with the CEO. He has to be the biggest role model here, and then it goes to whole upper management, I would say. And then, of course, for them, try to make it as safe as possible, give them a safe environment. Be very open with them about what this means for them. And the way that we handle this, at least at VeeMind, and this has become kind of our program, is that we start with the feedback that is being collected, and it's being distributed to the manager. This is the first step. And then the manager can decide how much of that he's going to share. And the idea is that he picks a few of these items and shares them with his team, and they see responsive leadership. And then level 2, we can go a next step, and then there will be one-on-ones that they can have, and it hopefully becomes a part of their culture. And in the end, you know, it's just a part of this whole thing. But the first step is so important because it's a trust step. You know, it's like a first leap into the dark in a way, and they have to see that there are no bad repercussions. They learn something about themselves, and they learn some practical guides on next steps. How can they advance next? And then what I always say, it should never stop there, and it kind of points back to what we just talked about with John. Some managers are sometimes scared that a software takes away the personal interaction. But the whole idea is to make it even more transparent and to give both parties a better preparation. What are we talking about here? Is this just one guy saying this? Is this quantitative data about myself that is making this a little bit more concernable, maybe, that we should act upon this? And so I think this having a first step where you have a trust building process with being anonymous and confidential data, this really helps to get this whole thing going.
Yeah, I agree very, very much. I think there's two separate answers though that have to be given in agreement with everything Felix said. The first question I would ask from an HR perspective, if I'm working with an HR leader and they're asking me that question, I'm asking, well, here's the issue. We've talked a lot about the employees feeling safe. Do the leaders feel safe? Right? Are they going to, do they have reason to believe that if they facilitate legitimate feedback, it's going to be a backlash on them and now they are no longer safe? They are part of the dynamic that deserves dignity. They are also human beings. And from an HR perspective, I think that's the first question we have to ask. So Felix mentioned it has to start with the CEO, or at least the people at the top of the organization. If the leader feels as if they are not taken seriously and that their recommendations don't go anywhere and that they're not heard and that they're not respected and that their leadership doesn't care about them, it's going to be very, very difficult for them to be willing to offer that to their people. Because what does that look like? Here's what it's going to look like. It's going to look like my opinion doesn't matter, but you're getting ready to take my people's opinion and apply it to me. That's really tough for any leader to go through. Middle management that's why I call them the forgotten leaders, because they're often forgotten. They're leveraged with all of the responsibility of leadership and almost none of the authority. And so they get stuck in this weird middle place. So as from an HR perspective, do the leaders feel safe? Because if they don't, that's going to be a very, very difficult hill to climb. But if I'm talking to leaders, I'm going to use a whole different line of thought, because ultimately I can't change what your leader does. So if I'm working with you and you're a leader, I'm going to tell you, listen, as a leader, leadership sometimes sucks. And you need to facilitate this for your own growth. And so that's the big idea. The overarching idea is it has to be growth oriented. If the leader doesn't believe it's going to be growth oriented, they're not going to get on board. And if they don't believe it, the only chance you have at getting them to get on board is to show them how, listen, I can't promise you that this is going to go the way you want it to, because ultimately I don't have the support above you or beside you. But what I can say is that you will grow as a person if you're willing to accept this feedback. And then what I can do as an HR representative is I can do my best to make sure that this remains growth focused and not blame driven. And that's a big factor. But yeah, the first thing is that I'd say is, do they feel safe? And that's from the HR perspective. And then if you're a leader, you're not going to feel safe, probably. Do it anyways. man up or woman up, whatever you want to call it, and just be willing to take that hit, because it's going to help you in your growth journey. And there's nothing more powerful for a leader than to grow in that leadership. That's how you can more effectively serve your team.
It's really interesting because as you're saying this, we actually had a Q&A come in. As someone who is saying here, so they work in HR, and they're saying that they hear very often that the store leaders do not feel that their opinion is valued by the CFO. So it's obviously a very high up person.
Yeah.
Even when every other executive does show the value in their feedback, it's the CFO that is not valuing it. So they're saying, how do we combat that for those leaders, especially when it's coming from somebody like a CFO? So I know, John, you did speak a little bit right there about kind of, just doing your best and taking what you can to improve yourself. Do you or Felix have any other ideas on how a store leader where their value or their feedback is not valued from the CFO, what they could maybe do about that?
Well, first of all, we should be addressing the CFO. Hopefully somebody has a voice into the CFO and lets them know, look, even obviously the CFO's responsibility is financial, and that's usually why there's that disconnect. The CFO is, I have operated in that position, right? And there's almost always a disconnect. Why? Because the CFO cares about one thing, the bottom line. That is literally their job, to care about the bottom line. What the CFO needs to understand is their bottom line is driven largely by the overall success of their staff. It costs them way more to get a new staff member than to keep one. It costs way more to train people. It costs way more to deal with slack and lack of productivity and all those things. So from the CFO perspective, they need to be addressed. And hopefully there's someone in the organization, especially if the rest of the executive team is on board, leverage that executive team to talk to the CFO and say, look, even when we have to tell them no, and that's going to happen in every business, there's going to be times where yes is not a viable option. We need to do it in a way that shows the individual's dignity, validates the opinion, and then communicates with them like a human being. It would be great if we could get you all new mannequins at the store. Unfortunately, that would cost X number of dollars. However, if your store can post these profits, we would be willing to make that concession. Now you're talking in CFO terms, and you're speaking with dignity to, I don't know if it's a clothing store. I use that kind of as an example. But yeah, so that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, and I use this line way too often, but if you don't have that ability, or if that's just a long, arduous hill to climb to get that CFO on board, the phrase, it's an old, worn out phrase, but it's so true. And that is, I would encourage the store leaders to be the leader that they wish they had. Everything they want the CFO to be for them, we don't have that yet. We're working on it. We're not content to leave it the way it is. But in the meantime, we're asking you to be the leader that you wish that CFO was, so that your staff doesn't have to deal with the same disappointments and the same discouragement that you face on a regular basis.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would maybe to add to that perspective, first, if you talk to the CFO, it's nice to have some authority, but basically it's just a common understanding that company culture influences the numbers. And then from there on, you have to go like, what influences the company culture? And clearly leaders are the vehicle, to drive something, to make feedback, for example, part of a culture, or to be the bridge between like an element like feedback and anchoring it in the culture. And so if he neglects the leaders, he neglects the culture and so on. And this will have a lasting effect that he doesn't like. So mostly, of course, it's probably some advisory, it's some basic understanding that you have to make. But for us, it's very different. We see that 50% of the companies are very aware of this. They know exactly that this is the case. And then the other 50, they have to be convinced of it. They know that there's something, and but the second part I wanted to add is that, like you said, be the leader that you want to have is so great, because if you improve your own leadership, it's not just that you're improving it for everybody else or for the CFO. It's mostly for yourself, because your own life, your own job will become so much easier if you embody these leadership principles and try to work on them instead of fighting them or neglecting them or whatever. Yeah. It's like a body in the closet, Yeah. So there's already a great benefit of following this route just for yourself. And then hopefully you will get to have some more followers or some more people who join the cause.
That's awesome. Hopefully that helped the person who wrote that question in. Those are really awesome ideas. I really like the idea of like be the leader that you want to have or that you wish you had. That's a really great approach. I know it's really challenging when you can't change other people, but hopefully some of those tidbits will help you make some improvements at least. Now, we have time for probably one more question before we move on. And I am really curious about this one from our poll. We've talked a little bit about it, but coaching strategies for giving and receiving feedback. So this is a really big thing. And I find this one really interesting because I think there's this conception that if you are a leader, you probably know how to give feedback and you should know how to receive feedback. But I think we've all, especially in HR, people probably realize you come across all types of people. And sometimes people are leaders and they just have never had any coaching. And then also from an individual contributor perspective, you've maybe never been in an environment where you've given or received feedback. So tips on how you can coach someone else to be receptive to feedback and also giving feedback themselves. I'll toss it to whoever wants to go. Yeah, Felix said John go first. So John, you're up.
You're the expert.
Yeah. Well, I think this goes back to something I said. Unfortunately, I find that I would say below director level, most leaders are not given any meaningful training. They're often, in fact, I hear all the time, well, we just want them to make copies of themselves at the team lead level, at the supervisor level. And so then we're shocked when they don't know how to give and receive feedback because I don't know, we never told them how, we never gave them any actual meaningful instruction in it. So I think part of it is literal just education, right? That is half of the battle, is making sure your leaders have actually gone through, hopefully meaningful. Hopefully it's not just here, read this pamphlet. Hopefully there's exercises and that's where there's meaningful value in having a partner in your leadership development, because there are these things that just they don't get passed on, and that is not something that is often intrinsically passed on. So you have a lot of executives that say, well, my team should know that because they see how I give feedback. Now I'm going to assume for the sake of this conversation that the executive is perfect at it. 99% of the time they're not, but let's assume they are. It still doesn't work that way, because tone of voice, for example, I have a fairly excited kind of tone, right? So it's not hard for someone to know when I'm animated and I'm passionate about something. I'm able to offer empathy with tone of voice. Not everyone has that capacity. So just because I do it well doesn't mean that the person that I did it for is going to have the personality or even capability to replicate that when it gets passed down. They may think, oh, wow, John's really good at giving feedback. That doesn't mean that they're going to be able to replicate it, especially without specific training. So half of it is education, and then the other half of it is encouragement of proper feedback exchanges. So when it happens well, if you're HR and you're trying to facilitate feedback loops, right, and you get something that let's just say Felix is one of my managers, I'm HR, and I look at Felix's the report that Felix's staff gave on him, and all it is positive stuff. There's nothing like, hey, Felix can work on this. It's just positive. My response to Felix is going to be congratulations. You've convinced your team that either they can't be honest or you're perfect, which I know you're not because you're a human being. And here's the problem. I don't know how to help you because you haven't encouraged real feedback. You haven't actually told them. I used to say, I was a martial arts instructor years ago, and I used to tell when at the end of every kind of semester, we would have everybody do a feedback form. And I would tell people, guys, I need specifics. If you don't like the way my hair is, tell me, John, your hair bothers me. I can't concentrate in class because I can't get my eyes off that ugly hair. I need to know what it is that I can change. Saying everything is great does not help me. And that's not authentic feedback. So celebrating when there is good feedback and addressing it when there's not, it's too easy, especially for HR. You got a million things to do. You got complaints, you got this, you got that. Super easy to watch Felix's results come in. Oh, Felix is good. Cool. Check. Next. Ooh, this person got some negative feedback. Let's address that. Whoa. The negative feedback might be better than the positive feedback. because we got meaningful feedback on the second one potentially, and the first one was somebody checking a box and just saying, yep, Felix is good, I love him, he's great. And maybe Felix really is just doing an outstanding job, but even the best leaders are not perfect. And so I think that's a big factor in it. On giving and receiving, growth should be the factor. And your people, whether you're HR facilitating feedback or you're a leader seeking feedback, the people should understand, whoever's giving the feedback should understand that it's growth oriented and that you want authentic feedback. You want to know specifically what is good, what should I keep doing, what would you never want me to stop doing because you really like that, and what is bad, what is it that you could do without, and if I never did it again, you would be like, yes. And expressing that in a way that lets them go, oh, this isn't a box. This isn't a, you're doing great, good job, 5 stars. This is a, hey, how can I grow? How can I be the best for you? Having it framed in that way, I think, will make a dynamic impact.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a very important thing with the growth mindset. I think this is the the biggest benefit if you work well with feedback, that you have a mindset that will thrive on innovation and being adaptive to new situations, because you're not scared of changing and all these good things. So it starts with that, and I think what people are scared of is, of course, being judged most of the time, and it mostly originates, I'm not too psychological here, but from self-judgment, right? Because they have to start with self-appreciation and with gratitude, and this goes both ways, for being self-reflective and being able to address critical issues in its own behavior, and then being thankful for someone else mentioning that to you. And these are the 2 biggest steps, I would say, and it probably starts with being, you know, with self-love and self-gratitude and all these good things. And then you go over to small steps, be very specific, don't try to make overall judgment or big statements, very narrow, very specific, and then always in a safe zone, of course, that it's not in a big round or anything, or of course, you know, not in, so you're not embarrassed in the beginning. And I think these are very simple steps that you can take, and everyone will at a certain point agree that he has been improving up until this point, and then you can take a next step.
And that brings us back to that celebration factor that we talked about earlier, right? Where you can do it 100% anonymously, right? We get the anonymous feedback, and Felix, if he's the leader, he can go back to his team and say, guys, I have no idea who said this, but I see that somebody feels like I should do this differently, and I just want to say thank you. I had no idea that was impacting you guys like that. I'm going to take this step in order to start working on that. And I want to invite you to hold me accountable to it. If you want to keep yourself anonymous, totally understand that. Feel free to leave a post-it on my door. If you would like to talk about it, I want you to know I'm open to that, and I would love to actually understand better what you meant so that I can address it better. But thank you, whoever it is that gave me this feedback. Thank you so much for doing that. And if anybody else wants to add to that feedback, I want you to know that I would love that so much. And so when you address it from in a celebratory way, where they feel like, oh, I get bonus points for providing meaningful feedback. Maybe not a bonus check, but you're celebrating that. I think that is really where you're going to start getting real feedback. Of course, going back to the beginning, consistency and all of that is 100% important, because if you say, hey, I appreciate this is amazing because I told you to in this webinar, right? And then nothing changes. At that point, it's all just like, well, he seemed excited, but couldn't follow through. So what's the point?
That's awesome. Great responses. We could probably talk for a whole other hour here, but unfortunately we do have to wrap things up. And I wanted to note, Jennifer, one of our people watching today, made a comment here in my QA box that I wanted to share because she gave a tip. So she said, one of the best things that she's ever heard that you can say upwards or downwards on a regular basis is, what is the one thing you see me doing or not doing that you think is getting in your way or in my way? I think that's a really great way to pose that question. So thank you, Jennifer, for imparting that.
Yeah.
Now I am going to share my screen because we are going to have to wrap things up here. Like I said, we probably could talk for a whole other hour here, but We're going to move on here. So we are going to wrap things up. And of course, when we are wrapping things up, I'm going to put a poll on the screen here about how valuable you thought the content in this webinar is. While the poll is up, people can feel free to share in the chat something that you've learned from today's webinar. While we're doing this, John, Felix, I want to give you 20 seconds each. Tell me what your biggest key takeaway from today's session is. Felix, I'm going to start with you.
Well, feedback is a part that you want to be in the culture. It's driven by leadership. It should start at top management. Bottom up is a little bit harder. It's definitely not a beauty contest or a blame game. And it's super important to keep it safe, anonymous, and consistent.
Yeah, and I would just tag on to that and say I agree 100%. You have to do something with it. I hope the takeaway is a feedback culture. Yeah, a feedback culture is not a feedback occasion. It's a feedback that, like Felix said, it's growth oriented. Even this, right? We're doing a poll right now, and I'm sure most people have already submitted. But if you hated it, tell us. Like, we can't make the next webinar better if we get a bunch of 10s and you just said it, well, I don't want to hurt their feelings. Like, I really believe this stuff, and I really would love to know if this was not helpful to people, so I can take action. And that's something that if Bucketlist and I ever do a webinar again, or if you go to a different webinar that I end up doing, you should be able to know, hey, he took my advice seriously. And I think that is the key. Actionable, actually do something with the feedback, or else we're all just filling in some paper and taking a whole lot of time. And again, an amen from HR, wasting a whole lot of HR's time.
Right.
That is very true. I shared this with John and Felix before, but in my previous job, they gave us a survey to do, and it took them an entire year to tell us the results of the survey. And all they did was tell us the results. Nothing happened after that. And my first thought was, why did I do this? What was the point in doing the survey?
Yeah.
Okay, so next up, just a slide here. So of course you can see how passionate we all are about this topic. So we did want to just give a little bit more information about Bucketlist, as well as our guest speakers for today as well. So of course, Bucketlist, we are a reward and recognition platform, and we're here to help create the culture of feedback that you're looking for. Just some wonderful stats. People love stats, of course. So I'm just going to throw out a couple stats to buffer the recognition and reward here. So 96% of employees want regular feedback, but only 64% of organizations actually have some type of feedback program. So this is really showing that people want the feedback. They really want to know and be able to take that feedback and improve it. But a lot of companies are not actually doing a good job at facilitating the feedback. And 41% of employees have actually left a job because they felt like they were not being listened to, which makes a lot of sense. If you say something so many times and nobody wants to hear you, after a while, you just give up and you want to leave.
Yeah.
Now, for us, we feel that Bucketlist is a really great introduction for people to bring in, because it helps facilitate that feedback. I mean, it also gets people used to giving feedback and receiving feedback in a positive format, so that when they do receive that constructive feedback, they're more receptive and willing to hear it and potentially make changes after that. Now, another thing we have here, if you follow us on LinkedIn, you have probably already seen this. We have a 12 days of appreciation giveaway challenge happening on our LinkedIn right now. The grand prize is $1,000 towards a holiday bucket list experience. Pretty awesome. I don't know about you, but I could certainly use $1,000 to go on a holiday right now. So if you're interested, hop on over to our LinkedIn page. You can scan the QR code right on the screen, or you can search for us by Bucketlist Rewards, and just following the different posts over the 12 days and interacting with them as you see them. Following us on LinkedIn, also just a great idea in general. We post a lot of awesome content about recognition and rewards and how you can bring these things into your organization. So lots of really great tidbits that we shared there as well. Now, of course, our lovely speakers. So John, I want to pass it over to you to talk a little bit more about your side.
Absolutely. SML Consultive aims to recession-proof businesses by reducing employee turnover. We believe that that is possible by empowering the frontline and middle management leaders to effectively engage with their teams, which will hopefully reduce employee turnover and we believe increase customer satisfaction. You can see there's 3 points there. I won't read the slide to you, but empowering frontline leaders, creating a culture that inspires confidence and driving unparalleled customer satisfaction is, we believe, all kind of three coins in the same pot, if you will, where or when you have leaders, specifically frontline leaders, the ones that are engaging with frontline staff, the people on the floor, when they are effectively engaging with their team, you're going to, of course, have improved morale. You're going to have better employee experience. The whole company is going to be better if those leaders are effectively engaging with their teams. That, of course, makes sure that the staff is happy, and happy staff tend to serve the external clients in a much more effective way. So it really kind of just turns into this great, awesome wheel that says, hey, if we invest into our internal clients will invest into our external clients will continue to keep our company in business and will result in a need for more internal clients. And we love to come alongside organizations that desire to empower their frontline leaders, and we like to provide a solution for that.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Sorry, I forgot to throw the poll up there before. I just threw it up a couple seconds ago. So if you are interested in learning more about SML Consultive, then please just pop your answer onto that poll right now. I'm going to give it maybe like 10 more seconds here. And otherwise, of course, if you don't get to the poll, you can certainly reach out to John via these contact that he has provided at the bottom there. So it looks like I don't see any more answers coming in, so I'll go ahead and end the poll there. And then, of course, we have Felix. Felix, I'm going to throw your poll up right now before you start talking. So same thing, if you want to learn more about VeeMind, please answer that poll that is on your screen while Felix is talking a little bit more about VeeMind for himself.
Yes, so VeeMind is a leadership development software that lets you measure the leadership quality like data. And we do this to build a culture of effective leadership, of course. We help you to identify leaders who need a boost or need a little help, who are doing great. And we help you to, or we help the managers themselves or other leaders to improve. So on each level, there is help. And of course, the whole company gets an overall. This is a little bit of the screenshot that you see in the screen here, is how you see your company progressing over time in these leadership elements. The whole software is very easy to set up. Basically no setup. You can just start. John can speak at length about this. Yeah. And we come with its own framework of leadership principles, but you can also have your own. I'd be happy to give you more information if you're interested in hearing more. Yeah, thank you.
Amazing. Thanks, Felix. The UI in your software looks awesome. I love that.
Thank you.
So I'm going to go ahead and end that poll. Now we got your one more to go through here. And of course, I missed the poll about Bucketlist. Didn't even put up my own poll. What am I doing here? So I'm going to put my poll up for Bucketlist. If you're interested in learning more about Bucketlist Rewards, you can answer that poll while I'm just capping us off here. So we do have our professional development credits, which you can see on the screen. I'm going to try to get them into the chat real fast here. So of course, these will be sent out to you afterwards as well. So if you don't get them now, no worries, you will get them later on. And we also will have the recording for everybody else sent out there as well. Give me 1 second here. Sorry, I'm trying to multitask and I'm not doing either of them very well. Other than that, though, thank you everyone for joining us today and for all of your interaction, the questions that came out of it, and your feedback on everything. It's really awesome. Really appreciate you joining us. We do run webinars quite often, and you can always see them posted on our LinkedIn page as well. So if you are interested in future webinars, please feel free to join and see what else we're up to over here.